Hi everyone, Big Thingy Strangtano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new The Chisel album. What a effing nightmare. Yep, second full-length LP from London's The Chisel, a no-frills punk band that debuted at the start of the 2020s, really took no time at all in releasing their first album, Retaliation, in 2021. The record was a retro throwback to numerous shades of British punk, not a new spin on this stuff, and it certainly wasn't trying to be. But what The Chisel lacked in originality, they made up for in ferocity and deadly accuracy with which they kind of recaptured the sound and vibe that they were, really serving a reminder of what made me a punk fan to begin with. So in a nutshell, this debut record was a strong place to start for the band, and I think they successfully build on everything that made that a very good, solid record on their new LP here. Cause this time around, The Chisel is sounding a bit more versatile, heavier too, while still sticking to their guns and celebrating the classic sounds of Cockspur, The Business, as well as Discharge. It's a conscious revival of old school street punk, hardcore, and oi, sans a lot of the knuckle-headed politics that often came along with some of the bands from those scenes respectively. Now, if anything stuck with me from The Chisel's debut, it was just how fast and tight the guitars and drums were, and that is still very much the case on What a Fucking Nightmare. The first full track on this thing, No Gimmicks, doesn't just have an intensity to it that reminds me of old school UK hardcore. No, it's also giving DC hardcore vibes like Minor Threat, Filler, that level of speed and unbridled rage. And the sound of the band's music this time around, the mix, is a lot thicker, bringing more bass, the timbre of the guitar tones not as thin, the drums aren't as washed out either. The sound of this record is as concrete as it gets. And I think things sounding richer this time around is especially complimentary to frontman Bad Cal's vocals, which on the last LP were aggressive and blood pumping for sure. But now on this new LP over here, you can hear that throaty, grunty low end in his screams, which he fully takes advantage of on some tracks by engaging in some slightly more melodic yelling, like on the following track, Cry Your Eyes Out, whose riffs have a classic rock and roll swagger to them, but sped up with a punk intensity, which serves as a reminder of just how much punk itself is in reverence to classic rock and roll music, and generally a desire to get back to basics. And as aggressive as this track is, it still has a harmonious anthemic chorus, packed with ringing guitar layers and gang vocals. And for anyone who thinks The Chisel might be coming across kind of basic or meat-headed on this song just based purely on their sound, the lyrics might surprise you, as they're about this angry, abusive sap who ends up by himself after taking out the shortcomings of his life on his wife and kids. So while this one is a bit more thoughtful, there's also no shortage of cuts on here that are very blunt, hit a lot harder, a sledgehammer really, and also bring infinitely relatable themes, like the song Nice to Meet You, which is very much about two-faced bastards who talk shit behind your back or when you're not around, but in person they're all smiles and pleasantries. There's also Bloodsucker, whose attitude and energy might be a bit overkill, but it's still a perfect distillation of how it feels to deal with somebody who's just draining while you're on your last nerve. There's also Fuck 'em, which really doesn't get more straightforward than that. Not sure this one needs too much explaining. So yeah, all these tracks definitely kind of dig into those very memorable moments in your life where you're just pissed as hell. And they soundtrack those feelings with massive group choruses, punchy riffs, and the result is just catharsis on another level. But even more addictive are the tracks on this thing that show a bit of a melodic flair, and I think have more emotional skin in the game, like the track Tomorrow, which is about just the constant grind of suffering and struggling day to day, which makes it difficult to see or envision tomorrow, a short-term future, much less a long-term one. The track also has a very heavy first half and a hardcore switch up around the midpoint too. There's also Living for Myself, whose bright screaming guitar leads sound like a chorus of trumpets or something. It's more triumphant than you think it would be. Lots of self-affirming lyrics on this one too, about a tough upbringing, struggling to make ends meet, but wanting more out of life too. And again, obviously living for yourself as opposed to working yourself to death for some other person. Needless to say, there are a lot of bars on this record about the rich politicians, who also get spat at on the opening lines of Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. One of the most ridiculously catchy punk songs I've heard in years, especially during that grand outro with these dramatically strummed guitar chords. You ain't seen nothing yet. Ba, 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 ba. The song Those Days is similarly harmonious too, and brings a lot of heart-pounding rhythms and poetic portrayals of a bygone time, which the way it's written, the way it's performed, has me nostalgic nostalgic for shit that didn't even happen to me. There's an amazing little solo bridge on the track too that's really powerful with these marching snares. It's equal parts rocking, righteous, and regal. There's a pretty strong final leg on the record too. Vengeance is for me is another stupidly catchy rager that's essentially about no longer taking someone's bullshit, kind of flying off the handle. Not something I jump to endorsing myself, but if you were going to put on a song to be the soundtrack to, you know, hype you up for kicking someone's ass, this should be it. But by that same token, the track cuts like a knife. Yeah, this one instead is about not so much allowing your anger to control you, and instead focusing that rage on things that matter. The whole thing reads like an old man punk story, but it's delivered with young man punk energy. There's another fiery solo on this track too, and that combined with the bits of dusty synth touches toward the back end of the track, it's got way more nuance than you would typically expect out of a hardcore record. What Do You Mean is yet another one of the more hooky and harmonious cuts here. They really do kind of get filed in toward the back end of the record, and it's the better for it. I mean, I think this LP, with it being as long as it is, would be pretty drab and one-dimensional, one note if every single song on the entire thing went as hard as No Gimmicks. But yeah, this one is still very much like a hardcore pub rocker that's very much about feeling used, underappreciated. These ghostly, what do you mean, like background vocals on the chorus, and man, do they go. Not only that, but it feels kind of reminiscent of something sharp and super infectious that a mod punk band like The Jam would have written back in the day. The closing track is really good as well, really in a nutshell a unity anthem for the powerless against the powerful. Not only do you get those throttling guitars and drums yet again, those rowdy and hype lead vocals, but some killer piano chords getting hammered on as well. Once more, the Chisel is bringing energy, bringing ferocity, but also these nice little simple but effective details that make them so much more than just your, you know, meat and potatoes hardcore act. Because yeah, obviously the Chisel, there's a lot of anger there fueling their music, but they've got passion, they've got layers, they've got good heads on their shoulders too, it would seem, artistically speaking. There are a few tracks on the record where I will say lyrically, maybe I would have liked for the band to get a bit more specific about, you know, where their ire is being pointed. There are some riff and chorus and drum beat ideas that I think maybe get reused or maybe not varied quite enough on some tracks. It feels like they're painting themselves in a corner just a touch. Outside of that though, this is an absolutely killer album, and I think one of the strongest showings that we're going to hear out of the punk field this year. I'm feeling a decent 8 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video to check out. Hit that up or a link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, the Chisel of forever.